a speaker on one side of the House to respond to a speaker on the same side of the House. So I'm not going to actually break that convention, that norm, and that practice, except to say if I had $1 million, I would have spent it on houses for my people in my own constituency. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this budget presentation by the Minister for Finance demonstrates in clear terms, Mr. Speaker, that the Labour Party administration clearly understands that their future is not tomorrow, but the future is now. And therefore, we are marching towards a more resilient, modern, and dynamic version of this beautiful country, Dominica. Mr. Speaker, we must not forget where we came from. This country has been battered by Erica, by Maria, and the global pandemic, COVID-19, which havoc on small nation states like Dominica and the world by extension. That notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, because of the shared determination of our people and the fortitude and visionary leadership of this country, we have been able, Mr. Speaker, to steer the ship above the choppy wave. And today, Mr. Speaker, this country is moving forward, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to say further. And this budget presents the opportunity for all of us, irrespective of our political shades, to reimagine a new Dominica and to work towards building our new Dominican civilization. The time is now, therefore, Mr. Speaker, for us to embrace the opportunities created in this year's budget and put our energies into positive action. Now is the time for action, Mr. Speaker. And now is not the time for us to be posing blame, but for us to embark on a collective endeavor to build a dynamic Dominica, Mr. Speaker. That is what this budget presents, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition, his contribution, Mr. Speaker, was punctuated by prose. But that notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, I was able to grasp some inconsistencies, Mr. Speaker, in this presentation. Mr. Speaker, the notion that, Mr. Speaker, under the CBI program, that you can assign a fixed rate for every economic citizen is misleading, Mr. Speaker, and to an extent, deliberately harmful, Mr. Speaker. And why do I say that? He knows, and every member on the other side, and in the last sitting, you heard from Dr. Henderson, who sought to explain the implications and the variance we have in the various programs. We have a program whereby, under a family of 4, someone can pay directly into the government and treasury, $165,000. We have the real estate class, Mr. Speaker, which allow for a family of 7. And then it calls for a certain amount to be paid to the government coffers. But, Mr. Speaker, so to apply a straight figure, that is to say, if you were to see 200 CBI citizens and to apply $165,000 US, it is deliberately harmful, Mr. Speaker, and you must stop it. But I'm not surprised, Mr. Speaker, because the leader of the opposition, he's not there, but I know he's listening, has consistently failed to pay attention to the basic premise and principle of maths and arithmetic, Mr. Speaker. And why do I say that, Mr. Speaker? You know, going back to primary school, on that side of the house is saddled with educators. And, Mr. Speaker, you may have been a teacher too. But you would have gone to primary school. And if you go to the simple principle of what they call long division, you will know that you cannot divide a smaller number by a bigger number. You know that. You will know that the teacher will say to you to pay attention to the size of the denominator. You would know that. Because very likely, you are going to end up with an improper fraction. And a bright teacher will say to you that your fraction is vulgar. Do you understand that? So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying, Mr. Speaker, if you give me a chance to demonstrate to you, can you permit me so to do? Okay, Mr. Speaker. I can recall, what's standard 2? No, I'm going to show you something and ask me if that's making sense. What do you see there?
You know the speaker cannot respond, so I'm just looking at it.
You see there 18, and you see inside the free. 18 to free. All right? 18 to free. The leader of the opposition have been consistently trying to put a bigger number into a smaller number. It can't go in, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't matter what lubricant you use. You can use margarine, you can use Vaseline, you can use WD-40, you can use Havoline oil. It cannot go in, Mr. Speaker. It can't go in. So, Mr. Speaker, but if you take out, let's go back there. Yeah. Go back further down, Mr. Darrow. But, so, if you put 3 there, and you put 18, then you put 18 there, and you put 18 there, 3 and 18, you will see that 3 can go into 18 6 times. It's not the opposite, Mr. Speaker. Yes, for him. So, Mr. Speaker, yes, if he doesn't appreciate that, how do you therefore expect him to have an appreciation for more complex arithmetic issues and principles, Mr. Speaker? So I'm not surprised by that. Mr. Speaker, then he said something to me that was fascinating. You can recall he said that $8.5 billion has been missing. But he accepts, when you look at the projections, he said that we're not going to be able to meet the projection in this year's financial cycle. I would have thought he would have said to us that if we're going to fall short, we have a reserve hidden somewhere of $4.5 million to take from it to make up for the shortfall. So he himself knows that his math is fuzzy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, permit me to make reference to a number of issues here that was raised on the other side, which I think needs some broader clarification and amplification. Mr. Speaker, we know that we went through this very unfortunate situation where a 12-year-old child who should have been migrating now to high school is still missing. As a consequence, Mr. Speaker, there was a national front, irrespective of political color shades, to fetch that child. There was no politics in the initial days involved in that exercise, therefore. Now we are seeing a variation where people are inserting politics in a matter of national significance. Mr. Speaker, all of us feel for that child. We had a situation where the police had to respond. But those of us who are younger than me, and most of you are inside there, would have recalled in November of 1976 that 2 school children at the time on the way from school were adopted by Elias Tumba. They were brought into the hills and they were held hostage for 48 days. Those of us who were minors like myself in those days, we were scared to even go into the shop to buy bread. You had to be back home before 6 o'clock because everybody said Tumba will be around. People were scared to run carnival beyond 6 o'clock. Can you recall that, lady Daniel? We have been down this road before. Elias Tumba was subsequently shot in a boxing plant, and he died shortly thereafter. That crowd of trepidation then disappeared. Mr. Speaker, in a similar situation, the only thing that is missing from that formula is the fact that young Kenisha is yet to be found. I want to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, through you, to express my gratitude to the police officers, the men and women of the police force, and Dominicans who were part of that exercise. As we speak, the police officers, supported by the fire and ambulance services, and the forestry officers, continue to search for that child. The police department has assigned a team of investigators to look at every possible lead that will bring closure to that very sad story. We all, as Dominicans, are praying and hoping that some closure can be brought to this matter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want at this time, Mr. Speaker, to say to this honorable House, going back to what the leader of the opposition said, when he made reference to the debt to GDP ratio, he made reference to 105%, our current situation insofar as our debt outlook is concerned. What he did not say, when he sought to have made a comparison between what obtained then during the Workers' Party administration, was that the true reflection of the national debt at the time did not form part of the debt portfolio of that time. In other words, Mr. Speaker, they cooked the books, Mr. Speaker. Cooked the books. Because you had other line items, Mr. Speaker. The debt that was being owed to the then DBMC, the monies that were owed to Social Security, that were not reflected in the debt portfolio. The $140 million, Mr. Speaker, that was contracted for the banks at 14% in Trinidad, that you heard Honorable Douglas quite well made reference to. They were not contracted yet. That was not reflected. When the Labour Party came into office, we had to start paying back those loans, Mr. Speaker. So you cannot make a comparison then and now. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we must not behave like we never lived in Dominica for the past 20 years, or 5 years. Mr. Speaker, you heard speakers before me made reference to the battering that was caused by Hurricane Maria and, Mr. Speaker, Erica before and COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. Where was the leader of the opposition? In Japan? In Dominica, Mr. Speaker. We are speaking in terms of, Mr. Speaker, in terms of damage, losses, and of course, Mr. Speaker, needs. In aggregate, over $3.6 billion were needed to restore Dominica to some semblance of normalcy. 4 years thereafter, look at where we are, Mr. Speaker. We are building, Mr. Speaker, state-of-the-art health centers. No other country in the Caribbean can build, Mr. Speaker. We are building primary and secondary schools, Mr. Speaker. No other country in the Eastern Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, is now doing, Mr. Speaker. And the list goes on, Mr. Speaker. We're educating more of our young children at universities than any other country in the OECS catchment, Mr. Speaker. That is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. So you cannot come and make a comparison between what transpired then and now. You can go around the country, Mr. Speaker, and you can see what is unfolding in a practical way in every community, Mr. Speaker. Now, if you want to compare and contrast, Mr. Speaker, the debt to GDP ratio of countries, let us go to the two most advanced economies in the world. What is the debt to GDP ratio of the United States of America? You know what, Mr. Speaker? 138%, Mr. Speaker. This is the #1 economy in the world. They did not have Hurricane Maria. We had Maria, we had Erica, and then we have COVID. We had COVID. The other most advanced economy in the world, Japan. What is the debt to GDP ratio of Japan? 260%, Mr. Speaker. There was no Erica in Japan. You go to Barbados, one of the leading economy in the Eastern Caribbean, 140%, Mr. Speaker. You go to Antigua, 101%. There was no Hurricane Maria in Antigua. You go to St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, 95%. So those are the realities. So when you come to the House, we have a fundamental obligation to educate and to edify the public, Mr. Speaker. Dominica belongs to all of us. We must therefore put our energy to reimagine a great and dynamic Dominica, Mr. Speaker. That is what the Labour Party is all about, Mr. Speaker. That's what you're all about. So don't come there and misrepresent the truth, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Senator Finn is a lady, John Finn, sorry. She drives around Rosa on a car. So I know that she's driving from Good Hope to Roseau. She's not taking a broom from Good Hope to Roseau. She's driving a broom. She's driving unopposed, Mr. Speaker. She's driving. She's not parking her car in Roseau, takes a broom from Castle Bruce or Good Hope and come to Roseau and then drive around Roseau. She's driving. So you cannot tell me, Mr. Speaker. Okay? Okay? So, Mr. Speaker, seriously. So, Mr. Speaker,
But which part? Is he not sure about the broom or the vehicle?
well, Mr. Speaker, at the university, I was told
You
that...
see, Honorable, that's the problem. They tell me I should not laugh, but they give me jokes.
Yeah. It is all contingent upon the connotation she infer from what I just said, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I was not speaking like Honorable Austri. So, Mr. Speaker, yes. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to get that straight, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, much was said about firearms, crimes, sexual offenses, etc., and quite rightly so, Mr. Speaker. All of us have to be alarmed by crime, and the whole issue of crime management is a fundamental issue for all of us in Dominica. But we must not speak out of convenience. We have to be serious by our deeds, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I once already AG did an excellent job insofar as trying to explain and bring some light to some of the legal ramifications involved. I'll not sit to actually go towards that direction, except to say, Mr. Speaker, Dominica was ranked the third safest country in the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean for a reason, Mr. Speaker, and 31st in the entire world, and they said the whole latitude soil in Patois, Mr. Speaker. Because we were able, notwithstanding the difficult period of time that we had in terms of COVID, Hurricane Maria, etc., to have witnessed a steady decline in the crime rate insofar as indictable offenses are concerned and summary offenses, Mr. Speaker. For a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, if you permit me just to refer to some information I have written before me, Mr. Speaker, from 2018 to 2019, Mr. Speaker, we had an 8% drop in serious crime in this country. And from 2020 to 2021, 18%, Mr. Speaker. Our crime rate, Mr. Speaker, when I've done the comparative analysis from the 90s, for the past number of years have been the lowest. But, Mr. Speaker, we all must be alarmed by this recent upsurge of gun-related offenses, Mr. Speaker, which has given death to a number of young men who should be at the productive phase of their lives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is going to require a holistic approach. A certain element of affirmative action is required. But fundamentally, Mr. Speaker, we have to work as a community and as a country to stop this nonsense now in this country, Mr. Speaker. We will provide, your government will provide, the police with all the required resources, Mr. Speaker, to get to the root cause of that problem and to find, indicate, and to syndicate, and to eradicate that syndicate, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Danny Lugay, the member for Roseau South.
Honorable Danny Lugay.
How could I have made a mistake, my parent? I applaud his intervention when he called for decisive action to be taken. I am therefore calling on every member of parliament